Hello and welcome to West Wales, and I am out and about with my little dog on one of our regular walks, and we are foraging. But we're not foraging for food, we're foraging for dye materials, because in this video I'm going to be concentrating on another aspect of natural dyeing. It'll be number 3 in the series I've been making, all about modifying. And what I'm talking about is using naturally occurring minerals to shift the colour of your first dye bath by popping it in something else, in this case iron, to create a whole new shade. So I'm going to turn the camera around and show you where we are. So I've spotted what I want, and I have a pair of gardening gloves and, oops, try not to shake you around too much, and a pair of secateurs and a foraging bag. So I'm just going to get on with it, I guess, and I'll turn the camera around so you can see what I'm after. So this is what I'm looking for, bramble. And this is sort of poking out onto the footpath. When the council come along, they're going to cut this anyway, so I'm quite happy to save them a job and trim this back. Just remember, when you're out foraging, or as Sally Pointer says, hedge bothering, that you're doing it responsibly. So I have my prickly harvest, plus I found a few oak galls which I have squirreled away in my pocket, and we will come to oak galls at some point. Right, I'm going to head home and I'll see you back in the Blue Bijou bungalow. So here we are back in the slightly echoey conservatory. Now this video is really concerned with modifying, sometimes called blooming, sometimes called afterbathing. So I'm just going to very quickly run you through the process of mordanting and dyeing, but I do have much more detailed videos on the channel all about that, and I will link those in the description below. I also have a free PDF on how to mordant wool with alum sulfate, and if you sign up for my newsletter, you get that as a thank you. So I will also link that in the description below. First things first, safety. Just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's not potentially poisonous. So make sure you keep all the equipment you use for dyeing completely separate from anything that you cook with or might use in the kitchen. Also, don't drink or eat or smoke or vape or anything where you're doing hand to mouth actions, so that you have no risk of accidentally poisoning yourself. The other thing you need to think about is we need a heat source, and I dye in my kitchen, so I always make sure that I've got all the windows and doors open so that I'm not kind of breathing in any fumes. I also have a face mask, and if I'm working with powders, I just make sure I put that on. Eye protectors, so if you're working with hot liquids or you're working with something that might be a bit alkaline or acid, and that is, you know, we can do that, that's really good. And a pair of marigolds. Rubber gloves, sorry, I said marigolds and I realised that maybe not everybody in the world would call them marigolds. Rubber gloves, kitchen gloves, but again, separate, so you only use these for dyeing. So you may have noticed in my natural dye videos that quite often I'll do a final rinse in rainwater that's had just a little bit of white vinegar added to it. And that only makes it slightly acid. It really isn't a strong acid. However, you can use oxalic acid or a liquor that you make out of rhubarb root, which again has oxalic acid in it, and that will have quite a dramatic effect. Just a word of warning, oxalic acid is very toxic. You can kill yourself with it, so just be very careful. I prefer not to use it personally, but it is available if that's something you want to do. The hail has just started again, so how far we're going to get with this video, I don't know. The other option we've got is alkaline, and generally we use washing soda. Definitely make sure you're wearing your marigolds when you are working with that, because it's quite alkaline. Once you've got the colour change, you then want to make sure you're putting it into water that is neutral. You can get very sciencey about it and use your litmus paper and again record all those things. Alkaline and acid modifiers are not something that I particularly do. I just wanted to let you know that it is available. Now, if you really want to go on a deep dive, then Jenny Dean's book, Wild Colour, has quite a good section on what colour changes you can get with acid and alkaline. The other really common modifiers you'll see people use are copper and iron. Both are potentially poisonous, so be careful. However, in dilution, they are in fact both used in gardens. So, you know, when we're kind of on the scale of poisonousness, actually oxalic acid, which comes from rhubarb root, is probably more dangerous than a dilute iron solution. But you don't want to drink any of them, so you definitely don't want to be eating and drinking. The first thing I do before I do any dyeing is I weigh the fibre or fabric or whatever it is I'm dyeing. I weigh it out at dry weight, because all the other calculations come from that dry weight. I cold mordant, and to cold mordant I weigh my fibre, and then I use aluminium sulfate, and I use 10% to the weight of fibre. So if I have 100 grams of wool, I use 10 grams of aluminium sulfate. I dissolve that in hot water, then put it into cold water, add my wool to it and leave it overnight up to 24 hours. And I find that's a really effective way of mordanting your fibre. And I have got a whole video on that. I then make my dye. So this case I'm using bramble, so cut up my brambles, put them in my big pot to extract the dye, put on cold water, rainwater ideally, because it's pretty much neutral. Bring it up to simmering point, simmer it for about an hour, let it go cold. If you can, leave it for 48 hours, because you'll get a really good concentrated dye. Now, with hedgerow dyes, the minimum you want is twice as much dye material to your weight of wool. However, I have found that these poor soils that we have in Pembrokeshire, because we're on the coast and we've got quite shaly soil around here, so lots of slate in the soil, all the minerals get washed out, all the nutrients get washed out. I find that if I go 4 times my weight of material to fibre, I actually get a much more successful dye. You really do need to do your own experiments, because it's entirely related to your natural surroundings. So the mineral content of your soils and your water is going to directly affect how much dye you actually get out of your dye materials. So I've made my dye. I strain off kind of the bits of leaf and whatever. So I've just got a dye bath. Add my wetted wool to that, bring it back up to simmering point. Don't boil it, literally just simmering point. Simmer it for an hour, turn it off, leave it overnight to cool. Now, you don't actually have to technically leave it overnight to cool. You could work with it once it gets to kind of hand hot. It's just always been my practice to just let it sit in there. I think I get a better colour. But again, do your own experiments, find out what works for you. Okay, we are now at the point where we can start modifying. So this is the colour that I got after I'd done my dye bath. And you're going to see it's very different to when I've done my iron modifier. For this process, I have my iron mordant, cream of tartar, measuring spoon only used for dyeing, face mask, gloves, eye protectors, a jam jar to mix the mordant in that is going to go in the recycling when I've finished with it, my tongs that are only ever used for dyeing. Then we have the fibre and little squares of cotton They have been dyed, cooled. I let them sit for 24 hours to try and make sure we get a really concentrated colour. Then in this iron pot, well, it's an enamel pot, but the iron is coming through, is rainwater. And I only ever use this pot for iron mordants. And the reason I do that is because iron mordant is actually quite difficult to get rid of. So if you wanted to do some dyeing and you were using a pot that you'd done an iron mordant in, chances are it would affect the colour. And that's not something you always want. Right, so next stage, I'm going to put hot water from the kettle in here, and we're going to add crystals to water, not the other way around, so there's no danger of it splashing up on us. So I've just put a quarter of a teaspoon of cream of tartar into my cold water and realised I didn't film it. So there you go, a quarter of a teaspoon. So there's now going to be half a teaspoon now for our iron. And some books you will see saying 2%, some say 5%. I always go for 2%, well, as close to 2% as I can get it. So for 50 grams of dry fibre, quarter of a teaspoon is going to be about perfect. And that's about all I've got left of this. So there we go. And that goes in there. Give it a stir about. And then I will wash this and put it with the rest of my kit. So we've just got our cream of tartar in there. It just helps to keep the wool a little bit soft. Then let's add this. Now that's not going to have raised the temperature very much because there's so much cold water in there. So I'm just going to put my fibre straight in there. So there's plenty of room for the fibre to move about. And we're going to pop this on the heat, bring it up to simmering point. So you can see there's just steam coming off that. It's not at simmering point, but I'm actually going to switch it off at this point because I think there's enough of a colour change. Okay, I'm just going to put my glove on and test the temperature of this water. I mean, I know it's not particularly hot, and if I was really clever, I'd have two thermometers, but I don't want to put my thermometer that I use for my other dye stuff in here. So yeah, that's fine. I'm just going to take this out so it cools down enough to put it in my rinsing water. But you can see what a big change has been. I mean, obviously it's going to look a little different dyed. It has been dyed. It's going to look a little different once it's dry. And I have kept out a little piece so you can see the difference between the iron mordant and when it's just dyed with the canes. This is now cooled enough that it's not going to felt the wool. Just put it in my rinsing water. It's got that vinegar in, and that's just going to neutralise the whole process. If this was a pH sensitive dye, I wouldn't put the acid, as in the vinegar, in there. Well, unless I wanted, you know, kind of an acid finish to it. But if I had a pH sensitive dye that was an alkaline dye and then I put it in the acid, I could well ruin the colour. So there we go. Nothing's felted because it's all nice and cool. And just give it a little gentle swoosh around. Then I'm going to change the water and just have regular rainwater to get rid of any residue. Then I'm going to put it to dry. If you want to use iron as a modifier, then it is widely available. You can buy it online, lots of craft suppliers sell it, and you are looking for ferrous sulfate. That's generally what it'll be sold as. It probably will also be kind of ferrous sulfate / iron mordant. That's quite common to see both. So before I show you the dried results, there are just a couple of things I wanted to say. You'll notice that I used cream of tartar, which is something you use in the kitchen, and you can get it from sort of the supermarket, Whole Food stores. I used that to stop the wool from getting too brittle or too hard. Iron can make wool quite hard, and just by adding that cream of tartar, it really helps to keep it quite soft. I personally don't like to go more than 2% for my iron because, again, I think it makes the wool a bit hard. If you've done eco dyeing or bundle dyeing where you've used rusty implements or rust water, then you might be wondering why I'm not making my own mordant to do the modifying. I think it's fine on plant fibres. They are much tougher than wool or even for silk, which again you could use this process for. So I want to know the exact percentage I've got of my minerals, so of my iron, which is why I like to use the crystals, because then I know I can weigh out 2% and it's not going to make my wool go really hard where I wouldn't be able to use it. On the left we have the unmodified results, and behind it, next to it, we've got the quite grey, it's a sort of grey-green, which probably isn't getting picked up particularly well by the camera, but it's quite different. So I hope you found that interesting and that you will have a little play with modifying your dyes. So I will see you in the next video.